The rain lashed against the earth, the storm raging like a force beyond control. I was lost, my body hurting from the fall, wandering through the night with nothing but the dark fields stretching out before me. I needed shelter. I needed rest. And then, there it was, a barn, barely visible in the storm's fury, offering the promise of warmth and safety. But inside, it wasn't just shelter I found. It was him, Micah. Barefoot, quiet, a presence so pure, so unexpected. Little did I know that one night would change everything. What started as an escape would turn into something neither of us could have imagined. The storm was relentless, the kind of storm that seems like it could tear the world apart. The wind howled, and the rain came in sheets, so heavy it felt like nature was trying to wash everything away. My body, already battered from the fall days before, could barely keep up with the journey I was forcing it to make. Each step felt heavier, each breath a little harder. My only goal was survival, find shelter, rest, and wait for the storm to pass. That barn, standing alone and humble against the dark, was my hope. I didn't expect much when I stumbled inside, expecting nothing but the quiet and the scent of damp hay. I leaned against the cool wood, barely able to keep my eyes open, when I heard the softest sound. A footstep, light yet deliberate, like someone was walking through the dark, but choosing each step carefully. The barn was still, almost holy, and for a moment I wondered if I had imagined the sound. But when I looked up, I saw him. Micah. Barefoot, his dark hair tousled from the wind, standing in the doorway like a figure from another time. At first I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. It wasn't the storm anymore. It was his presence, calm, composed, and so utterly different from the chaos I was drowning in. There was something in the way he stood there, his eyes locking onto mine, as if I was the only thing in the world worth looking at. He didn't ask any questions, didn't offer anything but a quiet understanding, as if he knew more about what I needed than I could even say. He moved slowly, with a quiet grace that made the air around us feel sacred, unspoken. His hands, gentle and careful, carried a small bucket and a bundle wrapped in cloth. He placed them beside me, and when I looked down, I saw food, bread, a boiled egg, and slices of apple. Simple things, but in that moment, it felt like a gesture from a different world. One that still believed in kindness. One that didn't judge, didn't expect anything in return. I was too exhausted to refuse, too stunned to even say thank you. But I didn't need to. Micah's silence spoke volumes. He didn't care about my past, didn't need to know why I was there or where I had come from. His presence was enough. It was strange, that quiet understanding between us. I had spent so long hiding from the world, running from everything I had once believed in. But in Micah's gaze, I saw something else, something I hadn't dared to believe in for years. He didn't ask me who I was, where I was from. Instead, he offered me the thing I had stopped believing I deserved: care, compassion, and a quiet, unspoken trust. It wasn't just the food or the water, though they were more than I had expected. It was the way he didn't rush, didn't push me to speak, just let me exist in the silence with him. In that silence, I started to realize something I had buried for too long. This wasn't just shelter. This was a moment that could change everything. As Micah moved around the barn, checking things, setting down his bucket, and going about his business, there was a calmness to him that I couldn't explain. He wasn't trying to fix me. He wasn't looking for answers. He simply existed, and somehow, his presence was enough to make the weight I had been carrying seem a little bit lighter. I watched him as he moved, trying to make sense of what was happening inside me. I wasn't used to this. I had been running from emotions, running from connections, for so long that having someone, especially someone like him, so simple, so pure, close to me felt almost impossible to accept. But I couldn't look away. Something about him, about the way he held himself, the quiet patience in his eyes, made me want to believe again. Eventually, he came closer, sitting down across from me. I had no idea what to say. I didn't know if I was ready to face the vulnerability his presence demanded. But Micah didn't force it. He just sat there, like he had all the time in the world. His eyes met mine again, and this time there was something different in them, something softer, more knowing. A quiet acceptance that said he understood without needing an explanation. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen, not for the man I had been, not for the role I had tried to play, but for the person I was right then. Someone who was broken, lost, and maybe, just maybe, starting to believe in something again. I didn't know how long we sat there. Time seemed to stretch, bend in a way that felt new. But the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm inside me, the questions I had long ignored, the fears I hadn't let myself face. Micah was the stillness I didn't know I needed, the kind of person who could make you feel like it was okay to stop running, just for a moment. And as the night deepened, I realized this wasn't just a chance meeting. It wasn't just shelter from the storm. Micah was something else, something I couldn't put into words yet, but felt in every nerve of my body. This wasn't the end of my journey. It was the beginning of something unexpected, something I hadn't planned for. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know what he was thinking or what this connection between us meant, but I couldn't walk away from it, not now. Not after everything I had just seen in his eyes. Something had shifted in me, something I couldn't explain, but I knew one thing for sure. It was a moment I wasn't going to forget. As the barn remained still, the storm outside began to settle, but inside, something was stirring. This was just the first encounter, and I had a feeling it would be the start of something I had never expected, something that would change everything. The barn was quiet now. The storm outside had finally calmed, but there was something else brewing inside me, something that had been building for years, hidden in the shadows, tucked away beneath layers of shame and regret. Micah's presence, so steady and unassuming, had pulled that something out of me. I hadn't expected it. Maybe I didn't even want to face it. But there it was, the past. My past, and it was waiting for me to acknowledge it. I shifted against the hay, feeling the weight of my body, the exhaustion of my journey catching up with me. It was strange how much silence could carry, how it could push you to confront things you thought you'd buried for good. Micah wasn't asking questions, wasn't pushing me. He didn't need to. His presence, the calmness in his movements, had already begun to draw the truth out of me, piece by piece. It was like I couldn't hide anymore. Not from him, not from myself. I closed my eyes for a moment, the memories flooding in, uninvited. Rhode Island. That's where it had all started. I had been young then, full of dreams, full of conviction. I had believed in the words I spoke, the faith I tried to live by. I thought I was doing the right thing. I was supposed to be a pastor. I had studied scripture, theology, had spent years convincing myself that I had the answers to life's biggest questions. I thought faith was the answer to everything. But somewhere along the way, I began to feel like a fraud. The weight of it all, those expectations, those rules, became too much. And then there was the love I couldn't ignore, the love I tried so hard to suppress, to bury beneath my sermons, beneath my studies, beneath the roles I was supposed to play. Why did it have to be so hard? I could still hear the words, the whispers of those who condemned me when they found out. They said it was a betrayal. They said it was wrong. And I started to believe them. I lost everything. My ordination, my reputation, the life I had built. I remember the day they took my name off the church bulletin. The way the silence felt so loud, so suffocating. The looks I got from those I had once called friends. No one had to say anything. The judgment was in their eyes, in the way they turned away, in the phone calls that stopped coming. I was excommunicated, but not in name. No, they didn't need to do that. They just made it clear that I no longer belonged. That I was no longer part of their world. And for a while, I thought I could handle it. I kept walking, kept going, pretending I wasn't affected. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the loneliness began to creep in. The shame, the grief. I couldn't outrun it. It clung to me like the rain that soaked my clothes, like the blood that stained my jeans. And the worst part, it wasn't just about the loss of my faith, or the loss of my place in the church. It was about the way I started to see myself. As broken. As unworthy. I tried to convince myself that maybe I was better off alone, that maybe I deserved the punishment, deserved to be cast out. After all, it was my fault, wasn't it? But then I found myself walking through fields in Pennsylvania, bloodied and lost, not knowing where I was, and the silence around me grew unbearable. I wasn't running from the world anymore. I was running from myself. I thought I could hide in that barn, in the shadows of the storm. I thought I could avoid feeling anything, that I could slip away into nothingness. But then I met Micah, and suddenly the walls I had built for myself began to crack. Micah, so quiet, so different from anyone I had ever known, had looked at me as if I wasn't broken, as if I didn't have all this baggage, all this pain wrapped up inside of me. He didn't need to know the details. He didn't need to ask questions. He just was. And somehow, that was enough. But what was I supposed to do with this feeling? This connection that I couldn't explain? How could I reconcile this growing bond between us with everything I had been taught? The shame that followed me for years, the fear of judgment. It was like a heavy cloak I couldn't shake off. Could I let myself feel again? Could I trust in something, someone, without fear? The storm had passed, but the real storm had just begun inside of me. Micah's presence had begun to stir up the truth I had buried so deep. I didn't want to confront it. I didn't want to admit that there was a part of me that was still searching for something more. But the more I sat in that barn, the more I realized I had been hiding from myself. I wasn't just hiding from the world. I wasn't just hiding from the people who had cast me out. I was hiding from love. I was hiding from the truth that had always lived inside of me. The truth that I could love, that I could be loved, without shame, without judgment. As the days passed, the connection between Micah and I deepened, and with it, my struggle became more intense. Was I ready to face what I felt for him? Was I strong enough to step out of the shadows I had lived in for so long? The truth was, I didn't know. But what I did know was this: I couldn't keep running anymore. The truth wasn't something I could escape. It wasn't something I could hide from in the dark corners of the barn. It was bigger than me, bigger than the world I had once known. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure if I was ready to face it. But I had to. Because Micah was the first person who had shown me that maybe, just maybe, I could finally stop hiding. And as I sat there, feeling the weight of my past, I knew that whatever came next, whatever happened with Micah, whatever happened with me, I was no longer running. I was finally seeing myself. And that was something I hadn't been able to do in years. But what did it mean? How could I face the future when all I had known was fear and loss? I didn't have the answers yet, but I was about to find out. The past may have shaped me, but it wouldn't define me anymore. What was coming next was unknown, and that scared me more than anything. But in that fear, there was something else. A glimmer of hope, of possibility, of the chance to finally live my truth. The barn was quieter now, the heavy storm outside slowly fading into the backdrop of the evening. Inside, the air felt different, charged, though not with the usual tension I'd expected. The silence between Micah and me had become something thicker, a shared understanding building between us, though neither of us had yet put it into words. But Micah, well, he seemed quieter than usual that night, and I couldn't help but wonder what thoughts were running through his mind. I watched him, as I had done for days now. He wasn't like the others I had known. His calmness was different from the usual quiet people kept around me, reserved but with a depth I couldn't quite put my finger on. He was still so young, yet there was something in his gaze that seemed to hold more than his years. It was a quiet strength, something that had been hardened by the weight of his upbringing, something I wasn't sure he even knew how to navigate. Micah moved around the barn without a sound, his footsteps barely noticeable against the creaking wood beneath him. It wasn't the way he moved that caught my attention, though. It was the way his eyes would linger, the way he'd carefully avoid meeting mine when he was close. Like there was something he didn't want me to see, something that had been hidden for so long. I could feel it in the way he carried himself, the internal battle he was fighting, the quiet struggle that no one else could hear but was loud enough to fill the space between us. I wanted to ask him, to gently peel back the layers I could sense in him. But I knew better. People like him, people from his world, didn't just open up to anyone. Micah's world was one where silence was expected, where questions were few, and where everything had its place, its order. But I had seen the cracks in that world, the way he hesitated when I caught his gaze, the way his breath would catch in his chest when the tension between us grew too strong. I wasn't the only one hiding from something. I wasn't the only one struggling. But what was he really struggling with? I had spent so much time thinking about myself, about the wreckage of my past, that I hadn't stopped to think about the complexity of his own. Micah wasn't like the others I had known in my life, the ones who had never questioned what they had been taught. His silence wasn't born from complacency or obedience, but from a deeper, quieter turmoil. I noticed the way his hands would tremble slightly when he passed me the food he brought, how his body would stiffen if I moved too quickly, as though he was waiting for me to react, waiting for me to make the first move. But I didn't. I just watched him, trying to read him in the subtle ways he revealed himself. He had never asked me anything personal, not once. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that he had questions of his own, questions he might be too afraid to ask. Was he ashamed? Ashamed of what exactly? His feelings? His desires? Or perhaps it was the guilt of even having them. I didn't know how long it would take before he said anything, if he ever would. But I saw the weight in his eyes, the same weight I had carried for so long. There was a deep sadness there, a quiet grief that mirrored my own. He was wrestling with something too, but I didn't know if it was something he had ever let anyone see. His world, his community, had taught him to keep things buried, to hide parts of himself in silence. Could I help him? Could I even try? And then, one evening, when I was feeling the ache of my own silence, I heard him speak. Not much, but enough. He had been watching me as I lay back against the hay, trying to rest, trying to forget the pain in my shoulder. He didn't approach me with words at first, not with questions or concerns about my health. Instead, he simply sat next to me, not touching me, but close enough for me to feel the heat of his body, the warmth that had somehow started to fill the empty spaces around us. You ever feel like... His voice trailed off before he could finish the thought. He cleared his throat and tried again. Like the world wants you to be something you're not. It was a simple question, but I could hear the weight of it. It wasn't just a passing thought. It was a question that had been asked many times, over and over, in the corners of his mind. I didn't answer him right away. Instead, I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since I'd arrived in this barn. His face was soft, unassuming, but there was a quiet defiance in his eyes, a resistance to the things he had been taught to believe, to accept without question. He wasn't so different from me after all. We were both searching, though for different reasons. Yeah, I finally said, my voice softer than I meant it to be. I've felt that way for a long time. Micah's gaze flickered to the floor, his fingers twitching at his side. It was the first time I had seen him so vulnerable, so human, and it hit me in a way that I wasn't prepared for. The truth, so raw, so simple, was written all over his face. He wasn't just hiding his feelings, he was hiding who he was. His family, his community, the expectations that came with it, they were all suffocating him. And now, he was trapped between two worlds. The one he was born into, and the one that was starting to make sense to him. The one that allowed him to be seen, the one that allowed him to love. The silence between us stretched, but it wasn't heavy. It wasn't uncomfortable, it was shared. We were two souls, lost and searching, trying to find our way to something more, something real. Micah wasn't the only one who had been struggling to find a way out. I too had been suffocated by my past, by the constraints of a world that told me how to feel, how to love, and how to live. We were both running from the same thing, the fear of being who we were meant to be, the fear of being seen for who we truly were. The days that followed became a quiet dance of understanding. Neither of us spoke much, but the connection between us grew stronger, clearer. We were both hiding, but in each other's presence, we didn't have to. The weight of our struggles didn't disappear, but it became a little easier to breathe. I could see it in Micah's eyes. He was starting to realize that he didn't have to be afraid. And though he didn't yet know it, Micah was about to face something bigger than himself, bigger than the walls he had built around his heart. He was about to make a choice, one that would change everything, one that would change us both. And though I didn't know it yet, I would be there when he was ready to face it. But for now, all we had was each other. And in the silence, there was a kind of comfort, a kind of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. The storm had faded, leaving only the steady sound of the rain tapping against the barn's roof, a quiet rhythm that seemed to mirror the quiet tension between us. I could feel Micah's presence next to me, just out of my direct line of sight, but still so palpable, like the air itself had shifted. In the stillness, our breaths mingled in the quiet space we shared, a space that had slowly, almost imperceptibly, become ours. There had been moments before, small ones, where our hands brushed, fleeting and innocent. But tonight, something was different. The way Micah was sitting across from me, eyes not quite meeting mine, body stiff but not pulling away. It told me that something was about to change. He was close, but not too close. Close enough for me to feel the heat of his body without touching, but distant enough to feel the weight of the space that still remained between us. And in that space was everything, everything unsaid, everything unacknowledged but so loudly present. I could feel the hesitation hanging in the air, and I realized, maybe for the first time, just how much we were both struggling to bridge that divide between us. Micah, with his quiet strength, and me, carrying the remnants of my own broken past, both terrified of the unknown. of what it would mean to cross that line. What would happen if we did? Would it change everything? Or would it be the answer to everything we had been quietly craving for so long? I broke the silence first, my voice coming out softer than I meant it to be. You ever wonder what it would be like to stop hiding? I didn't look at him as I spoke, afraid that if I did, the words would lose their meaning. But I felt his gaze, steady and searching, even though he didn't answer right away. It wasn't the first time I had spoken my mind to him, but it was the first time I felt the weight of my words. There was something about this moment, the way the rain still whispered against the barn, the way the world outside felt so distant, like we were in a different universe altogether, that made it feel like now, more than ever, was the time to speak. To say the things we hadn't dared to say. I don't know if I can, Micah's voice came, soft but raw, carrying a depth I hadn't expected. His words hung in the air between us, fragile and honest. I don't know what it would mean if I stopped hiding. If I let myself feel what I feel. His words hit me in a way I didn't anticipate. I could hear the struggle in them, the same struggle I had buried for so long. But there was more there, something unspoken, something beneath the surface that he wasn't ready to share yet. His eyes flicked to me, not directly, but I could feel the weight of his gaze, like he was asking for permission without using words, permission to be seen, permission to be free. I had been waiting for this moment, waiting for him to take the first step, waiting for him to reach out. But I realized now that I had been waiting for the wrong thing. Micah wasn't going to come to me on his own. He needed me to make the move. He needed me to show him that it was safe to be vulnerable. Without thinking, I shifted, crossing the space between us. My heart raced, not with fear, but with something else, something deeper, something that felt like truth finally breaking through the walls I had built around myself. I knelt down in front of him, close enough to feel the warmth of his body, close enough to see the way his chest rose and fell with every breath, as if he was fighting something inside. I reached out, my hand trembling slightly, unsure of what I was about to do, but knowing, deep down, that it was the only thing I could do. Slowly, gently, I cupped his face in my hands, feeling the roughness of his skin, the warmth of him, and in that moment, all of my doubts melted away. He didn't pull away. Instead, he closed his eyes, a slow breath escaping his lips, as if he had been holding his breath for far too long. And that was it. The space between us that had seemed so vast, so impossible to cross, disappeared in that one quiet, fragile moment. I leaned in, cautiously, still unsure of what would happen next, but knowing I had already made the decision to let it happen. When our lips met, it wasn't what I expected. It wasn't wild or urgent. It was gentle, slow, tentative, like we were both testing the waters of something we had never dared to explore before. But in that gentleness, in that softness, there was a power neither of us could deny. It was a kiss that said everything we hadn't been able to say before. A kiss that said, "I see you." A kiss that said, "I'm here." Micah's hands, which had been resting at his sides, slowly, almost hesitantly, reached up, brushing against my arms, as if he was afraid I might pull away. But I didn't. I let him touch me, let him feel the connection between us, so fragile and yet so undeniable. His fingers grazed the back of my neck, sending a shiver down my spine, but still he didn't deepen the kiss. He waited, as if waiting for me to guide him, to show him that it was okay to take the next step. And then, without thinking, I pressed in closer, my lips parting as the kiss deepened, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the world fall away. It was just him and me, two souls that had been lost, two hearts that had been hiding for far too long. We weren't hiding anymore. When we finally pulled away, both of us breathless, I looked at him, my heart pounding in my chest. His eyes were wide, and there was a flicker of something I couldn't quite name. Was it fear? Hope? Maybe both. But he didn't look away. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly, as if he had just realized the weight of what we had done. "You don't have to be sorry," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We're both just trying to figure it out." And in that moment, I understood. We weren't just trying to figure out how we felt about each other. We were trying to figure out how to live in a world that had taught us to be ashamed of our feelings, to hide parts of ourselves that deserved to be loved. But now, here, in the quiet of the barn, we didn't have to hide anymore. We had taken the first step, and that was everything. The air between us had shifted, had changed into something real, something deep. But even as the kiss ended, even as the night stretched on, I knew this wasn't the end of our story. It was only the beginning. Because the hardest part was still to come. What would we do with what we had discovered about each other? Would we stay here in this moment, in this barn, hiding forever? Or would we have the courage to step into the unknown and face the world together? The kiss had been a moment of vulnerability, yes, but it had also been a moment of freedom. Freedom to love, to be seen, and to finally stop hiding. The next steps were ours to take. And as the rain continued its gentle rhythm against the roof, I realized that we weren't just surviving anymore. We were living. And together, we would face whatever came next. The barn was silent now, the echoes of our kiss still lingering in the air between us. It was a moment of clarity, but also a moment of great fear. As we pulled away from each other, our eyes met, and I could see it. The fear. It wasn't just in the way Micah's hand trembled when he reached for me again, or the way his breath hitched in his chest. It was in the way his gaze shifted, as if asking, "What now? What do we do with what we've just shared? What does this mean for us? And maybe most painfully of all, what will they think?" Those same eyes that had seen us together, would they see us now, and would they understand? Or would they condemn us, silence us, push us further into the shadows where we'd already spent so much of our lives? The fear of judgment was the heavy weight in the room, the same weight that had been there all along, but now it felt even more suffocating. This wasn't just about us. This was about everything we had ever known, everything we had ever been taught. It was about the world outside this barn, the world that would never understand what we had found here, in the quiet of this place. For a long time, I had convinced myself that this barn, this small, hidden place, was enough. I could be who I was here, in this space where no one could see. I could hide behind the walls and pretend that the rest of the world didn't matter. But Micah, he had always been different. He had never been content with hiding. He'd spent his life in a community that demanded conformity, that told him who he was allowed to love, how he was allowed to live, and most importantly, who he was allowed to be. And now, after everything we had shared, how could we ever go back to that? How could we go back to a world that would never understand the way we felt? The judgment, the expectations, it was too much to bear. But I also knew something deeper, something truer, that had been growing between us. It was a truth that neither of us could deny anymore, no matter how hard we tried to push it away. Micah shifted beside me, pulling his knees up to his chest, his eyes fixed on the floor. I could see it, the internal battle. He was torn between the love he felt and the fear that had been ingrained in him his whole life. He had been taught that to love like this was wrong, that to love me was a sin, a betrayal of everything he had ever been told. And yet here he was, here, with me. "I'm not sure I can do this," Micah finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, but it cut through the silence between us like a knife. His words were full of the same hesitation I had seen in his eyes. "I don't know what will happen if they find out. What will happen to us? To my family? My whole community?" The weight of his words settled over me, and for a moment, I didn't know how to answer. I had spent so much of my life hiding, running from my own truth, that I didn't know how to tell him that sometimes the things we fear most are the very things that shape us. That sometimes the very thing we're afraid to lose, our place, our identity, our sense of belonging, is the very thing that keeps us from being free. "I don't know either," I said finally, my voice thick with the weight of everything I hadn't yet said. "But I do know that we can't keep running from this. From each other, from who we are. Not anymore." Micah's gaze flicked to mine, but the fear didn't fade from his face. It lingered there, in the furrow of his brow, the tightness around his mouth. How could he face the world when everything he had been taught told him to hide who he was? How could I, too, face my own truth, knowing that it might cost me everything I had ever believed? It was easier to hide. Easier to pretend that none of it mattered, that the quiet moments we shared, the connection that had blossomed between us, were fleeting, temporary, just a passing storm. But deep down, I knew that it wasn't fleeting. It was real, more real than anything I had ever felt before. The silence between us grew longer, heavier, until Micah finally spoke again. "What if I lose everything? What if I lose my family, my community, my place in this world?" His voice broke on the last word, the vulnerability clear in his eyes. His heart was in his words. He was afraid, yes, but more than that, he was searching for permission to be who he was, to love without fear. I reached out, my hand brushing his, not in a way that demanded, but in a way that simply acknowledged. I saw him. I saw the man in front of me, not the rules that had been imposed on him. "I can't promise you that it won't be hard," I said, my voice gentle, "but I can promise you that I will be here. No matter what happens, no matter how hard it gets, we will figure it out together." Micah's eyes softened, but I could still see the weight of the world in them, the fear of what came next. It wasn't just the fear of losing his family, his community. It was the fear of losing himself. The fear of stepping out of the shadows and into the light where he might finally be seen, truly seen, for who he was, for what he felt. "I'm not sure I can walk away from all of that," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." "You are," I said, my voice steady, though I knew how hard this would be. "You've always been stronger than you think." And in that moment, I realized something. The real struggle wasn't just about what we feared losing. The real struggle was about finding the courage to live honestly in a world that would always want us to hide. And in the space between fear and hope, in the fragile space where love blossomed against the odds, that's where we would find the courage we needed. But that was the hardest part of all, the courage to step forward together, even when everything around us told us to stay hidden. I could feel Micah's hesitation, the weight of his internal battle, and I understood. Because in that moment, I was fighting the same fight too. Would we stay in this barn, safe and hidden, where no one could see us? Or would we walk out into the world, step into the unknown, and face whatever came next, together, unafraid of what the world would think, but more afraid of living a life of silence? Micah's struggle wasn't just about the rules of his community. It was about the rules we had all lived by. The rules that told us we weren't allowed to love freely, to love without shame, to love without fear of judgment. But maybe it was time to rewrite the rules. Maybe it was time to face the judgment, to break free from the boundaries society had placed around us, and to finally live in the light. But that journey was just beginning. The dawn had barely touched the sky when the moment of decision came, the moment that would change everything. It wasn't dramatic or sudden, like the thunder that had shaken the barn when I first arrived, but it was no less powerful. It was quiet. It was still. Yet it was a decision that would require every ounce of courage I had. We had spent the night in silence, each of us grappling with our own thoughts, our own fears. The barn was peaceful in a way it had never been before, the heavy weight of unspoken words hanging in the air. Micah had pulled away earlier, retreating to the corner of the barn, his back turned, his hands clasped tightly together. His presence, though close, felt like a distance that neither of us knew how to bridge. He wasn't avoiding me, not exactly. But I knew deep down that he was avoiding the reality of what we had shared. He wasn't ready to face what we were becoming, what he was feeling. I could see it in his eyes. That same fear, that same hesitation, the weight of his upbringing, his family, his community. It all rested on his shoulders, heavy and unrelenting. And in that weight, I could feel the world pressing down on him, holding him back, forcing him to question everything he had been taught, everything he thought he knew. I didn't blame him for the silence. I understood it. In so many ways I had lived that silence for years, hiding, pretending, numbing myself to avoid the pain of being truly seen. But now, after all that had happened between us, I couldn't help but feel the pull of something else, something more powerful than fear, something that demanded to be acknowledged. It was then that I realized the choice wasn't just Micah's to make. It was mine too. This decision to leave the past behind wasn't just about Micah walking away from his family, from his community, from everything he knew. It was about me doing the same. The past I had been running from, the life I had built in the shadows of shame and guilt. It had to go too. I couldn't keep holding on to something that only kept me tethered to a life that wasn't truly mine. And I knew deep down, in the deepest parts of myself, that if I stayed here, if I stayed in the safety of the barn, in the quiet where no one could see us, I would never truly be free. Micah shifted, breaking the silence, and I watched as he stood, his eyes still shadowed by uncertainty. But there was something different about him now. His shoulders were no longer hunched in fear. His chest, though still tight, seemed to expand with some quiet realization. The decision was on the horizon, hanging between us like the morning sun that was about to rise. Neither of us could ignore it anymore. "I can't stay here forever," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but steady, filled with the weight of what he was about to say. "I can't keep pretending that everything is okay when I know what I feel. When I know what you mean to me." His words hung in the air, full of vulnerability, but also an undeniable strength. "But I'm scared. I'm scared of what's ahead. Scared of losing everything, losing myself." I stepped toward him slowly, giving him the space he needed, but also closing the distance between us. He wasn't alone in this. Not anymore. Not ever again. "You won't lose yourself," I said gently, my hand reaching out to him, resting lightly on his shoulder. "Not if you do this for the right reasons. You won't lose yourself if you walk away from the things that never allowed you to be who you truly are. The things that told you to hide, to be ashamed, to pretend that the love between us was a mistake. Micah's eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something in them that wasn't just fear. It was hope. It was the faintest spark of belief that maybe, just maybe, this could be different. This could be real. "But what if I can't face them?" he asked. "What if I can't face the people who will hate me for this, who will turn their backs on me?" I sighed, a deep, heavy breath that seemed to carry the weight of all my own fears. It wasn't just his fear anymore. It was mine too. I had spent so much time running from my past, from the things that had broken me, from the life I had been forced to leave behind. But here, with him, in this quiet barn, I realized that the only way forward was through. And in that moment, I knew that if we were going to walk away from everything that held us back, we would need each other. "You'll face them," I said softly, my voice steady. "But you won't be doing it alone. Not anymore. We'll face it together. We don't have to stay hidden. We don't have to live in the shadows anymore." He stared at me for a long moment, his lips pressed tightly together, the conflict still written all over his face. I could see him struggling, trying to reconcile what he knew in his heart with what he had been taught all his life. He had spent so long pretending, so long suppressing his truth, that the idea of embracing it fully felt like a mountain too high to climb. But I knew. I knew because I had been there. I had been the one hiding for so long that I forgot what it felt like to live without fear. And I knew that the only way to find peace, to truly heal, was to embrace the truth, no matter the cost. "I know it's not easy," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I know it's not going to be simple, but I promise you it's worth it. You're worth it." And in that moment, Micah nodded. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was enough. It was his decision. He was finally ready to leave the past behind and step into something new, something real. "I'm scared," he whispered again, his voice barely audible, but this time there was no shame in it. "But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to leave it all behind if it means being with you, if it means being free." I smiled softly, my heart swelling with the kind of warmth that only comes from knowing you are no longer alone. This wasn't just about Micah. This was about us both. This was about breaking free from the chains of our pasts, from the things that had kept us bound for so long. It was about choosing each other, choosing the love we had found in the most unexpected of places. "Then let's leave," I said simply. "Let's leave the past behind and walk into whatever comes next. Together." And as I looked at him, standing tall now, no longer weighed down by the fear that had once controlled him, I knew that there was nothing left to hold us back. We were finally free to move forward. The barn, once our refuge, seemed small in comparison to the world outside, but it had served its purpose. It had been the place where we found each other, where we discovered that we didn't have to hide anymore. Now, as we turned toward the open door, the world was waiting for us. And with every step we took, we were leaving behind the past that had shaped us. But we were also embracing the future that had always been there, just beyond the horizon. The future we were about to build, together. It wasn't going to be easy. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges we couldn't even yet imagine. But for the first time, we weren't afraid of the unknown, because we knew that, no matter what happened, we were ready. And we were ready, together. The barn faded behind us, and with it, the past. And as we stepped forward, side by side, we knew that this was just the beginning of something real. As the barn faded behind us, so did the weight of everything we had been carrying, everything we had been hiding. For the first time, it felt like we were standing on the edge of something vast, something unknown. And the truth that had been buried deep inside us was now surfacing in a way that could not be ignored. The air was different, lighter, filled with possibilities. The path ahead was uncertain, but the feeling that we were walking into something new, something better, was undeniable. And so we walked. With every step, the uncertainty of the road ahead didn't feel like a burden anymore. It felt like freedom. The same freedom I had been searching for years, running from my past, from my mistakes, from the world that had tried to define me, to box me into something I never truly was. And here we were, walking side by side, not as strangers, but as two souls who had found something beautiful in each other, something real, something that couldn't be erased by judgment or fear. The world around us seemed to quiet down as we walked. No words were needed. The rhythm of our footsteps on the damp earth spoke louder than anything we could say. It was a quiet declaration, one that said we had made our choice. We had chosen each other, chosen ourselves, and chosen a future where love wasn't something to hide, but something to be embraced. There was a slight chill in the morning air, the kind that comes just before the sun breaks through the horizon. But it didn't matter. As we walked, the warmth between us grew, not just from the physical closeness, but from the understanding that we were in this together, facing the unknown together. And for the first time, the unknown didn't scare me. There was something incredibly humbling about this moment. We were both stepping out of the comfort zones that had once defined us. For Micah, it was his family, his community, everything he had ever known. For me, it was the remnants of my past life, the role I had been expected to play, the expectations that had been placed on me. We were both leaving behind worlds that had no place for us as we truly were. But now, walking together into the unknown, we were no longer defined by those places. We were no longer defined by the past. What mattered now was the present, the choice we had made to embrace a future without fear, without shame, without holding back. And the beauty of it was that we didn't need to have all the answers. We didn't need to know exactly what would happen next. The world was big, and it was waiting for us, full of opportunities and possibilities we had never imagined. But the one thing we knew, without a doubt, was that we didn't have to face it alone. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. We knew that. There would be challenges, doubts, and struggles. There would be moments where we questioned if we had made the right choice. Times when we would be tempted to turn back, to hide again. But we had already walked too far. The road we had walked together, the quiet moments shared between us, the moments of connection, those had shown us a truth that we couldn't unsee. We were stronger than we had ever realized, and the love between us was stronger than any of the forces trying to pull us apart. As we walked, I couldn't help but think about the weight we had been carrying for so long, the secrets, the shame, the fear. It had all been so heavy. But now, with each step, that weight seemed to lighten. It was like the air itself was offering us a new beginning, a chance to rewrite our stories. A chance to define who we were and who we wanted to be, without fear of judgment, without fear of rejection, without fear of losing what we had finally found in each other. We weren't running anymore. We weren't hiding. We were walking toward something, toward each other, toward a life that was ours to shape. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. This was the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where we didn't have to be afraid to be seen, to be heard, to be loved. In the distance, I could see the world stretching out before us. Open fields, a wide sky, endless possibilities. There was no roadmap, no guide to tell us what to do next. But we didn't need one, because as long as we had each other, we had everything we needed. We had love. We had the courage to face the unknown, to take the next step, even when it seemed impossible. Micah was walking beside me, his presence solid, a quiet strength that seemed to anchor me as we moved forward. I could see the change in him too. The fear had not completely disappeared from his eyes, but there was something new, something brighter. It was like he had found his own strength, his own path, and for the first time, he was walking it with his head held high, unburdened by the weight of expectations that had once defined him. And that was the beauty of this moment. We weren't perfect. We weren't free from our pasts, but we had made the choice to walk forward, to face the future, together. We had taken that first step into the unknown, and for the first time, the unknown didn't feel like a place of fear. It felt like a place of endless possibility. I glanced over at Micah, his hand brushing against mine just for a moment, but enough to remind me that we were in this together. And in that small, simple gesture, I knew that whatever came next, we would face it side by side. We would face it together. The journey was just beginning, and there was no turning back. The unknown was waiting for us, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't afraid because I had found something that mattered more than any fear. Something real, something true, something worth fighting for. So, as we walked, our hearts in sync, the future ahead of us, I couldn't help but smile. This was our new beginning, a beginning filled with love, with hope, with the promise that no matter what came our way, we were ready to face it. Together. The journey we've just walked through, the one where we left behind fear, shame, and judgment, it's not just a story. It's real. It's the essence of what we all face when we finally decide to be true to who we are. The moment we take that first step toward embracing what's real, the moment we stop pretending and start living authentically, it changes everything. For so long we're told who we're supposed to be, what we should look like, how we should love. But the truth is, those boxes, they don't fit us. We spend so much of our lives trying to squeeze into a mold that was never made for us, denying pieces of ourselves in the process. We hide. We suppress. We walk through life with walls so high we forget what it feels like to breathe freely, to feel seen, to truly love. But here's the thing. When you finally start embracing what's real, you feel a freedom like no other. It's like every weight you've ever carried begins to fall away. For Micah and the man in this story, it wasn't just about walking away from the past. It was about stepping into a future where they didn't have to hide anymore. It was about living with the kind of love that's not defined by others' expectations, but by their own truth. This moment is about more than just a kiss. It's about acknowledging the fears that hold us back, but deciding not to let them control us. It's about acknowledging the pain and still choosing to be vulnerable, choosing to trust. Trust in each other, trust in ourselves, because that's where true freedom lies. You see, we don't have to wait for permission to be who we really are. We don't have to wait for society, for family, or for anyone else to tell us that it's okay to be ourselves. Because the only permission we need is our own. And once we give that to ourselves, once we choose to stand in the light of who we really are, that's when we find what's truly worth living for. I want you to take a moment and think about that. What's real for you? What part of yourself have you been hiding or pretending isn't there? What part of you has been buried under fear or shame, just waiting for the chance to come to the surface? Because the truth is, what's real will always find a way out. You can try to keep it buried. You can try to pretend it's not there. But in the end, it will rise. And when it does, it will change everything. It will shift the way you see the world, the way you see yourself, and the way you love. The journey of embracing what's real is one of growth, of courage, of vulnerability. It's not easy. It's messy. It's complicated. But it's also beautiful. When you step into your own truth, you create a ripple effect that changes everything around you. You give others the permission to do the same. You give others the freedom to be themselves, just as you've allowed yourself to be. And as we finish this story, as we look ahead to the future, I want you to remember something. The most powerful thing you can do is embrace what's real. Not just in the quiet moments when no one is watching, but in the world around you. When you let go of the fear of judgment, when you choose to love and live authentically, you open up a whole new world, a world full of possibility, full of people who are just as scared and just as brave as you. So, take that step. Embrace what's real. Because once you do, you'll find that the world isn't so scary anymore. It's waiting for you to show up as your truest self. And that's where the magic happens. Now, if this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt the weight of fear and judgment, and if you're ready to embrace what's real in your own life, I want you to hit that like button, subscribe, and share this message with someone who needs to hear it. Together we can create a world where authenticity, love, and truth are celebrated. Let's walk this path together. Let's embrace what's real.